Welcome to Faith on the Frontline. Faith on the Frontline is a podcast series focused on providing insight into the real-life stories faced by everyday people and the ways in which their faith helped them to overcome the life hurdles that they faced. In this series, we'll be talking about a host of subjects. These will range from coping with debt and the rising cost of living crisis, parenting young people in particular, given societal pressures, through to having an open and honest conversation about mental health or even dealing with death and loss. This 6-part series will talk about real-life personal experiences with real-life women who will share how their faith helped them through the battles. Our mission here at Faith on the Front Line is to share some of the personal stories of how others have overcome real challenges that many people still face today. And by having these conversations, we hope that you too can find faith in your battles. My name is Ola Rugbu. I'm a mother, a businesswoman, a mentor, and I've been through many of my own battles, from facing my own mortality, having successfully gone through a treatment for cancer, through to going through a divorce and bringing up teenage children as a single parent. And I'm your host for Faith on the Front Line. Great. So today we're going to be talking about a very big and real issue being faced by a lot of people right now: debt. In the UK alone, more than 1 in 5 of the UK population, that's 22%, are in poverty. That equates to approximately 14.5 million people. And alarmingly, based on a Christians Against Poverty commissioned research with YouGov, it was found that in August 2022, an estimated 25.4 million people in the UK are struggling financially. That's an increase from an estimated 7.9 million people in 2021. The combination of rising interest rates, increase in energy costs with further increases planned, and the general spike in the cost of living, many people are faced with a difficult decision of eating or heating their homes. In fact, there is a rise in the number of people using food banks because, frankly, they cannot afford to shop for food to eat. In this podcast, we'll be talking about financial hardship and the specific steps taken by one incredible woman to break free from the cycle of debt, and through her organization, help others to do the same. I'm pleased to have with us today Paula Stringer, who is the CEO of Christians Against Poverty. Before joining Christians Against Poverty, Paula held a senior role as head of production and operations for BBC Sport, where she managed all operational parts of the business. She was involved in delivering the Olympics, Match of the Day, Wimbledon, the World Cup, and, well, everything sport that goes on at the BBC. Paula has considerable experience in leading teams and is a very creative and effective problem solver. With her entrepreneurial and leadership gifts, Paula has a whole range of experience, including running a hotel, setting up sports camps across the UK for a charity, and even running a successful local business with her husband. Having been through their fair share of trials as a family, and after debt counselling saved her marriage, Paula joined Christians Against Poverty in 2018 as executive director. She is passionate about pairing her life experiences with her wealth of skills to make a difference to those still on their debt-free journey. Paula will share her very personal story of how she not only managed to get out of debt, but is helping many others to do the same in her role as CEO of Christians Against Poverty. Welcome, Paula, and such a varied and interesting range of experience. So before we start, Paula, could you tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are and also what you do at Christians Against Poverty?
Yes, thank you so much for asking me to do this, Olu. It's a pleasure to meet you and to be on this podcast. So I am, you make me sound far grander than I really am. I am a wife and a mum and a follower of Jesus primarily. And I have two amazing children, two girls. One is now 18, I can't believe it. And one is 13, and a husband, Dan, and a dog called Lola. And yeah, like I say, we're just a very normal family, but I also happen to have a very busy but incredibly privileged job where I run Christians Against Poverty, an organisation that basically partners with churches all over the UK to help people out of debt and out of poverty, and to see them embraced by the community that's around them, the church, and introduce them to Jesus. It is one of those amazing privileges, because actually there is a church in every single community in this nation, and every person in that church who is a follower of Jesus actually knows that we are mandated, we are commissioned to love our neighbour. So what better than to work and offer the church effectively some tools and equip them to be able to meet the needs of those people around them. And that's what Christians Against Poverty does.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic, Paula, and it's really great to see the impact that Christians Against Poverty is doing within society. And I really love what you talked about loving your neighbor. But it is a real struggle for many people paying their bills or even putting food on their table, and this is becoming even more pressing given the cost of living crisis. Can you explain or talk about your experience of being in debt and experiencing financial hardships to give our listeners a feel for where you've come from?
Yeah, of course. As you pointed out in your introduction, I actually had this incredible job at the BBC. I worked at the BBC and in broadcasting for many, many years before I came to CAP. And the reality, Olu, is I wasn't actually planning to leave my incredible, if not stressful, job at the BBC. But I would say that God had other plans, actually. A few years ago, well, it was actually a couple of years after the last financial crash. And my husband and I actually owned a business, which was a deli and coffee shop and restaurant where we lived locally here in a place called Marple. Dan actually ran the business for us. I also worked at the BBC. We had two small children, and things were going really well. We'd had the business for many, many years, well before the recession actually hit and before the financial crash. It actually coincided that we had kind of hit capacity in the building that we actually had for our deli and coffee shop and restaurant about, I don't remember what year it is. I always get the years mixed up now. But anyway, we hit capacity. It's almost like if we were going to move on to the next level, if you like, with our coffee shop, because it was so popular, we were going to have to expand the premises. So we prayed about it. And then this premises became available that was twice the size, literally around the corner from where we were. So we took a business case to our local bank and said, we would like to expand the business. Would you, join us in that? And obviously help us to do that with financial backing. This is our plan. And the business bank manager said, I come into Toast and I love it, and this is a good business plan. Yes, we will. So we ended up basically moving into a premises that was twice as big, and also putting ourselves in a sort of a tighter financial position, obviously, because we'd also financed or refinanced in order to expand the business. And we knew that the first few years were likely to be quite tight, but we got a business plan. We'd worked out, worst case scenarios, best case scenarios. And the first year went really well. Or certainly we hit all the markers on the business plan. What we did not know at that point, though, was that the recession would hit the high street quite significantly the following year, because there was actually a lag in how it impacted the local sort of retailers, and also the number of people that were actually, on the street spending money. And that in itself then coincided with Costa Coffee opening up around the corner. Now, what usually happens in this kind of situation, is that if another business comes and opens up near you, that's like another deli or another coffee shop or something similar, your business will take an immediate hit. But what then also happens is, because you end up sort of creating a coffee culture, if you like, or a culture around it, there's a groundswell as more people come to that area going, let's go to Marple, they've got loads of nice places to go. And so we always gained back more ultimately than we lost. And it did begin, we had a great coffee culture. The problem with this particular year is that financially we were already operating on tight margins, and we couple that with fewer people coming to the local high street and Costa opening. We ended up going down within about 8 months, and we did everything. We worked every hour we could to try and save that business. Dan stopped taking a salary. Everything that we could possibly do, we did to try and maintain the business itself and keep it running. And nothing seemed to work. It was almost like it kept on falling apart every time we thought we were getting somewhere. We ended up having to close our business, and what then proceeded, I think, took Dan and I really by immense surprise. And when I say that, I think we had absolutely no idea that would precipitate one of the most difficult and traumatic periods of our lives to date. It was incredibly hard.
It sounds like it was a very, very difficult period, Paula, and thank you for sharing. And I can imagine, given where we are right now with the interest rates, that other business owners are probably going through the same thing as what yourself and Dan experienced. So can you just tell us a little bit about the effect on both yourself and also on your family, because there would be an emotional effect of, going through that experience?
Oh, yes, I can. Well, what happens, I think, particularly when you own a local business, you've got local people that work with you, and all of our suppliers. One of the USPs of our business was local, organic, fair trade. It was we wanted to understand and be clear about the provenance of the food that we were selling, and so we used local suppliers and had really good relationships with them. But when you do that and your business fails and you end up basically owing people a lot of money that you can't pay back, that becomes very personal and very difficult very, very quickly. And the people, it didn't just affect Dan and I. We had 16 people that worked with us, and it affected them and their families as well. So we ended up in a situation. Well, we ended up ultimately going through a very, very difficult bankruptcy, and I now know what it feels like to be the person that's hiding behind the door when someone's banging on it. And I now know what it's like to do everything you can in your power to try and sort a situation out and feel like an utter failure when it just doesn't happen. And I know what it's like to see my own husband just shrivel up, lock himself away for an entire year and talk about harming himself, wondering whether he's actually going to do something. And the impact particularly on Dan, who totally felt responsible for everything that had happened, and it was not. He couldn't have worked harder, but just the impact on him emotionally, and then the impact on his response to his family. And he shut himself off, but he also he was very I suppose depressed, but also his responses were aggressive. And in no way was he physically aggressive or even abusive in that sense, but it was like a different person. So, we struggled, our whole family struggled. I got Dan, who was basically having a breakdown, didn't leave the house for a year. We've got angry suppliers who used to be friends that had turned into enemies. And we were trying to navigate the bankruptcy system all alone, and we couldn't even afford to pay the fees ourselves at that point. We didn't even know how we were going to do that. And I thought, this is it. It's going to break us. This is going to break us. And I say that, although, so people understand that, it was awful. It was in every way destructive and really very traumatic. However, we together as a family had a faith in Jesus. We'd got our families around us supporting us. We'd still got our friends and our church friends, if you like, there that were loving us and supporting us. And I'd still got a job. So it was unbelievably difficult. And yet, I think that's a very important part of our journey, if you like, the understanding and realization once we'd come through and sort of more out of the other end or into more light, to recognize that how almost literally sit and say to one another, how does anyone that's got less than us, which is, a lot of people, ever navigate this and get through it without it having such a significant detrimental effect on them.
That sounds, it was a very difficult situation. So I wonder, and you talked about the fact that, before you actually started the business, you prayed about it. And once you got the, I would imagine, did you get the green light which said, yes, go ahead and do that, which is the first question. And the second is, when you were going through that really difficult time emotionally and, looking at the impact on your family and the suppliers and relationships, did that at any point affect your relationship with God or affect your faith?
It's a really good question, Alo. I think we were both, positive that God had given the green light for us to go ahead. And in a sense that, the doors opened before us as well. And we always close the door. If it is not right, close the door. Out of the blue, a property that had been occupied for years became available, perfect size, perfect location. And the bank said, yes, we love you and we support you. And so the doors opened. I think that what immediately happened for me was my immediate response was to draw close to God. I would also say that, obviously this went on for an amount of time. And I would say that I became quite numb across that time as well, and therefore then relied on everybody else to do the praying and the encouraging. And I dried up, if that makes sense. And that not my faith. I didn't, I was absolutely believed that God would see us through this. I genuinely believed that. But I didn't know how he was going to do it. I didn't know what it would end up looking like. And I would say that there's a great book by Pete Greig called God on Mute. And I think that it's in those times of utter storm that it can feel very quiet, but that's more because of that was because of me, not because of God. God was acting, God was speaking. And I think it was, you only, when you look back, and I've been blessed to be able to look back and go, I see why. And I love, just to say, Corrie ten Boom and her story. I've reread a book of hers called Tramp for the Lord recently, and it's completely refilled my faith bucket. And Corrie and her sister Betsy, they were thrown into Ravensbrück concentration camp for hiding Jews in the 1940s. And, what to the rest of the world was this dreadful place where God's goodness and his sovereignty didn't exist. They really, dared to believe that was a place where God could bring his hope and his love. And I remember reading an excerpt from that story years ago when I was going through what we were going through, thinking, if God can shine light in that horrific situation, he's going to be able to do it in mine. And that's all I needed to know. And then I just put my head down and got on.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely so true. And Paula, as you were speaking, it sort of brings me back to a time where, I'm a business owner as well. The rug was pulled from under my feet,
Yeah.
and I had people who I was responsible for, family that I also had responsibility for, mortgage. I was a single mother, and we got to a point where we had nothing. I just remember that image of the widow in the Bible who had nothing, and before you know it, her cupboard was always full of
Yes.
yeah. And I remember during that time we had absolutely nothing, not even a penny to pay our mortgage. And I really like the fact that you talked about leaning on other people. And I remember our pastors at the time giving us money, and my cupboard being so full of food I couldn't even shut the cupboard door, being blessed by my parents, who helped us. So sometimes when I just hearing you talk, it makes me think about maybe God wanted me to move out of the situation that I was in, because by going through that experience, it brought me closer to him. I'm not saying that's the case with yourself, but certainly in terms of what I experienced.
Oh, I think it is exactly that. Although I think I now look at this and go, I can't imagine another way that God would have it effectively got me out of the BBC doing what I'm doing now, because I had a really fantastic job that I loved. And having gone through what we went through, I honestly, that is entirely why God allowed it, in my view, because he knew that it would give me a heart and a passion and an understanding in a way that would drive me to act and to change both Dan and I. And I remember my dad sending me through this job ad in the post. I didn't even know about the job. I knew about CAP, and I'd known about them for years, thought they were brilliant. And he sent me this job ad through, and I picked it up and opened it, and it had a sticky on it that just said, just read it, like that. And I was looking at this going, okay, and thought, oh, that's interesting. I love Christians Against Poverty, brilliant. And read it and thought, oh, I really believe that. I mean, they were describing me in a kind of characteristics and even in skill base in lots of ways.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, oh my word, I really started to feel a bit of a tingle, and then looked at where it is. It's in Bradford. I don't live in Bradford. And then went to and that's the salary. No. So like you do, because you have to protect yourself. You know what I mean? It's like we're literally just okay. And God knew, to cut that long story short, it wasn't, the sacrifice was exactly right. It's where God wanted me to be right now.
So true. And I would just like to, just go back to what you talked about again. You talked about the fact that when you were going through the situation, you were numb, and then you leaned on other people. So can you talk a little bit more around the support that you access in order to get you to the point where you were debt free?
Yeah, I can. I mean, that in itself was a gift from God. We actually contacted, interestingly, CAP couldn't help us because we were it was a business that had failed, and CAP does sort of personal financial situations. So we ended up contacting a number of different agencies and individuals, saying, please, can you help us to navigate through this nightmare that we're in? And we had about 4 different people come and say, yeah, it's no problem, I'll come and see you at your home. And they'd sit down, and they'd been lovely and saying, yes, we can definitely help you, and they would go away and they'd say, we'll be in touch, and then they'd never get in touch again. And we couldn't understand it, and I would email them and I would phone them up, and it was like they dropped off the planet. And that was one of the most upsetting parts of this whole thing, because we were absolutely desperate. And every time we spoke to someone, they would tell us it's going to be fine and we're going to help you. And then they would literally shut the door on us. And I didn't realize until, well, we did find someone to help us, and I'll come on to that in a second, that the reason that is because these people were there to take a cut of the money. And we didn't actually, they realized that we got nothing. Not only that, but our house at that point was in negative equity, which turned out to be a miracle and a blessing, because we would have lost the house otherwise. It wasn't worth them taking it in the end. But We hadn't realised that. We were just left with a wall of silence. And,
Mm.
we got my dad and my mum and our family, praying over us and just kind of like, that we don't know what to do to help you. They need some help. And it was actually a friend of Dan's from school, not a Christian guy at all. He phoned up out of the blue and said, I've heard you're struggling. Is there anything I can do to help, Dan? And Dan sort of told him a little bit about what was happening. He said, right, I've got a guy. He's going to come and see you. I'm paying for it.
Wow.
This guy came all the way over from Sheffield. And in that moment, he said, I'm not interested in this, your friend's money. Because once he heard our story, he went, I'm just going to help you. Again, this guy wasn't a Christian. He was just a guy going, I really see that you are desperate. And he spent the next year walking through the journey with us, because it takes a while to kind of finally get actually everything through. And he did all of the paperwork and really coached us through it. And it was an unbelievable answer to prayer. I still look and go, I don't know. I don't know if anyone navigates it. We were just absolutely stumped by it. So, we considered that to be, a direct answer to prayer. It was a gift from God. And we are still in touch with Ben now, the chap that helped us through. And, he's well aware that we told him that he was our miracle, our answer to prayer.
And again, it's just the way that God hears you and sends the person at the right time, the right people at the right time in the right way. Okay, thank you. And you talk about some of the practical steps that you took. So you talked about having spoken to somebody who took you through the paperwork and got you to the situation where you were debt free. So can you talk through some of the other practical steps that you took in order to get you to the point where you are right now?
Yeah, of course. It was a longer process than either of us could have imagined. And of course, we were left, we ended up having to go and submit all of our paperwork in court. And that sounds like nothing, but it's actually a very traumatic thing to do. Again, you're stood there going, I can't believe we're in this situation. We felt utterly ashamed. And that is an overwhelming sense throughout this entire thing. And we eventually got to the point where we were declared bankrupt, and you have 6 years of, I suppose I was thinking about slight entrapment. It's not entrapment, but you know what I mean? You are effectively covered by this whole process for 6 years, and your credit is significantly impacted. Now, as God is so, so good, it was around the time that I ended up getting a promotion at work, sort of just as this was all coming to a head. And it turned out that what we did was, one of the things that was most affecting my husband was not being able to pay back the people locally that were his friends, the suppliers that actually, they were the ones that also needed that money. And so what Dan and I agreed to do over the course of the next few years was to set aside any money that we could possibly spare and then work through paying back every single supplier. And with that process took us 5 years in total. And I remember Dan and I walking into the local butcher's with the last £350 that we owed back in I think it was the beginning of 2018 or something like that, and handed it over. And John, the butcher, who's a very good friend of Dan's, he remained good friends, bless him. He himself kind of cried and said, I cannot believe that you have you've come back over and over and you've paid off this full amount. He then proceeded to give us a pile of meat that was more, I think was probably about the amount that we'd owed him originally. So, but actually it was that process was probably one of the most healing processes that for Dan out of all of this. My husband, he did not work for quite a while. this affected him so badly. He eventually did get a job, but he could only cope with working part-time, and it was the least stressful job that you could imagine, working at a National Trust property not far from us called Lyme Park. And he would just sit in there, his administrative type job, and he would sit and watch the deers bounding across the hills. It was one of those kind of cathartic, again, just God's gift to Dan. And we survived. It felt like we were surviving because we were giving everything away, which is the right thing to do. And it wasn't very long after the last payment was paid to the butchers that we would go. I remember a conversation that said, we can save up and go on holiday.
Wow.
And we were like, oh, that'll be so good. And that's when my dad sent the job ad through the door for Capuk. I'm not saying we haven't been on holiday, but it was really interesting. It was, again, God's timing is incredible. Just in, he gave us time and space for Dan to heal, for things to get stable again, for us to pay back the money that we did owe. And I know we didn't have to, but we wanted to, and it was the right. We believe it was the right thing to do, the honourable thing to do, and God honoured that process, and then said, "And now I'm moving you on." Yeah, and I think that's God through and through, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that is really nicely put. And you talked about time to heal, doing the right thing in terms of the people that you owed money for, before God was saying it's time for you to move on now. And that's such a great learning. And I'd like that moves us nicely on to the next question, which is, what advice or learning would you like to share with our listeners? And bear in mind, Paula, that some of our listeners are going to be Christians or people of faith, and there are going to be others that are not. But think about, both. What kind of advice would you give to them and want to share with them?
I think two separate bits of advice. One of them is very practical. And if you are in a situation, or look like you're going to be in a situation where you are going to struggle financially, don't wait to get help. Honestly, it's for us, I think we, in retrospect, would have benefited from actually speaking to someone about the situation we were in months before we did. Because what happens is you think you can sort it out. You're desperate to sort it out. You don't know where to go. That is what Christians Against Poverty is there for, to have a conversation and say, okay, yes, we can help, or know that, but they can. We signpost, and we will do anything that we can in advising you in the situation that you're in. So don't wait is the first bit of advice. I think the second bit of advice is that if someone is struggling in that situation, it is not, if you get the advice, and I do think that that's a critical part, there's always hope. Yeah. And I genuinely can tell you that there is always hope. Yeah. That there is no situation that is so dark, no matter how it feels in that moment, that you cannot be rescued out of it. And that's my experience. I mean, there are many other things that we could talk about that are not necessarily connected to my job, but a few years after we went through bankruptcy, my daughter, the eldest one, Martha, 18, her kidneys failed and she nearly died, and we went through and again it kind of like you fall back into various different situations, and again, whilst it was dark, moments of darkness, there's nothing that I don't think that God can see you through. And I would really like, I'm going back to Corrie ten Boom, because she's written a poem, and it's called My Life is But a Weaving. And this for me is I live having to think about this from time to time. And it's all about the fact that, we don't choose the weaving, sort of like the colours that are weaved into our life. And the fact that it's sometimes, we can see sorrow being weaved, or, all of those other things. And actually at the end of the day, when we get to the other side, all we're seeing at the moment is that all of the knots and the gnarly bits. And actually when we get to the other side, we will see the true pattern, the full weaving as it actually is, as God saw it. And I truly believe that is a precious thing, and that's true for anyone.
Yeah, that's incredible, and that is so beautiful, and such a powerful message. So there is always light at the other side, and I love it. You know, when you get through to the other side, you can see things the way God sees it. Yeah,
it's perspective, isn't it? It's easy to lose perspectives. I know that. That's why I need to keep reminding myself as well.
No, thank you, Paula. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about? Christians Against Poverty. So any more information for our listeners around what you do and what additional support they can access if they ever needed it?
We're in a very, very tricky national situation, and I know that this is affecting significant numbers of people. There's, over half of the population are talking about, either in significant trouble, sort of 20% are in real trouble, and 35% are just about coping. And we're kind of like watching that unfold as costs increase. So we're well aware. We're kind of looking at this picture and holding our hands up, going, okay, what do we need to do in this situation? We are taking calls and supporting thousands of people. And it's not an easy thing to do. That's no question about it. Particularly when you're speaking to someone that has actually got no kettle and no fridge and no cooker because they've sold all those things to pay for rent and to buy food, but they couldn't even afford the energy to use them anyway. And that is a more common story now than it's ever been in our history. But I come back to the hope. We are also seeing more communities and more churches mobilize around people and actually acting and doing work, if you like. And obviously I talked about the fact that there's a church in every community across the nation, and those loving communities, basically what we provide to them is through them is debt services, job clubs, life skills courses, emergency aid. We're actually the biggest provider of face-to-face financial education in the UK as well. So, I want people to know that there are people that care deeply. And, go on our website if you want to know more. Go on our website if you want to contact us, and we can help you because we want to. That is exactly what we are here to do. And the website is capuk.org.
That is brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Paula. That's really, really insightful. Such a wonderful and important conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you to all our contributors and supporters. Paula Stringer from Christians Against Poverty, Peter and Hannah Ibbotson. The soundtrack is called Our God is Good and is provided by Jemi Nwadike, and you can find her music on Spotify. If you would like to access support and resources on any of the themes discussed during this podcast series, go to our website, which is www.faithotfl.com. That's www.faithotfl.com. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to you joining us on our next podcast.